I've been told I have 20 minutes to give a talk on, and the only thing I can think about to talk about in 20 minutes is a story I read. It's from a magazine that's published in Virginia. It's called The Virginian, and it's $2.50 a copy, and you can get these copies in Box 8, New Hope, Virginia, 24469. And I have read some of the most interesting stories in my life in this magazine. This is written by Ralph McGill, and it's entitled Stonewall Jackson and BMI. Many of you have never heard of Stonewall Jackson, and many of you have never heard of BMI. And both of those are household words in Virginia. This man, Ralph McGill, was sitting at a football game when BMI was playing Georgia Tech. And you sit up there at BMI and you get all sorts of feelings because the old gray buildings are up there and all the stories that we've heard through the years of BMI and its cadets. So this takes place at Grant Field. That's down in the hollow, right below BMI. And he's sitting in the stands and he's writing this story. Grant Field. It was a day for brooding. The football field was a bright green. The uniforms were colorful and sharp, and the crowd was gay in spite of the day. But the clouds hung low over the field, and there was a slight wind that hardly blew the occasional mist. Virginia Military Institute had a gallant team on the field. She always does. Gallantry has been a part of her bone and blood ever since she has existed as one of the nation's great tools. It was nothing new, either to be fighting an uphill fight against great odds. And so, sitting there under the dark, brooding skies, watching the charge of the lines and the rush of the backs, seeing the flung ball and the booming side kicks downfield, it was not possible to keep the mind on football. And one could not help sitting back and shutting out the noises of the cheering sections and letting the wind flow along with the stream of history. Tom Fool Jackson. He was called by BMI. The students of his day called him that because he was a stuffy, dour professor of physics and instructor of artillery. Serious-minded persons at Lexington respected Thomas and Jonathan Jackson as a devout Presbyterian deacon, stern as the Old Testament by which he had to fight, and vowed to live by the New Testament by which he lived. They liked, too, the fact that he was interested in the welfare of the Negro slaves and tried to give them instruction, especially religious instruction. The students thought him a curiosity, and there were many to say with them when the testy professor was called to service when Virginia joined the Confederacy, "What do they want with that old fool?" He was just past 35, but bearded and a man of moods. He was to be regarded by his troops as a reincarnated Joshua, by those who had read Carlyle as Cromwell come back to earth. At times, his associates seriously discussed whether he was sane enough to command. Always they regretted their doubts. He was to emerge as the most brilliant man of tactics in the army. The mediocre teacher became the Iron General, strict disciplinarian to a degree called merciless, respected by his troops but hard on them, as he was harder on his foes. He wore an ill-fitting old coat, a faded one that he had brought from BMI. He carried 2 books with him, Napoleon's Maxims and a Bible in his saddlebags. He could be tender with children. He loved his wife and was loved deeply in return. His heart was flint, yet it could give off sparks of portrait. His last words were portrait. How many of you know his last words? He was dying. His last words, "Let us cross over the river and rest under the shade of the trees." And so, sitting there in the stands, as the cry of the crowd goes up, you think of him emerging from the halls of BMI and going forth to lead the troops whose victories in the Valley Campaign occupy students of military strategy and tactics today. He was chiefest among those who went from VMI to form a reservoir of strength upon which the Confederacy could draw. There were 433 of these, and they were a part of that amazing military structure which lasted for 4 years, without adequate supply equipment, harassed by bumbling from the top and by political generals. So this iron saber vowed to an iron guard intrudes upon the day, and you think of him in the long, hard death there in the wilderness, and leave weeping, saying, "The sun never shone on such an officer." Anyone who saw the armies in Europe, the infantry, the artillery, and the aircraft crews, remember the shock of how young they were. The pictures of the men and officers of the Confederate armies are confusing. The bearded officers were often in their 20s, and Jackson, dead at 38, stays in the thoughts of persons today as a bearded old man already near death from age when a volley from his own troops struck him that fateful day. The VMI cadets come in full strength to Grant Field, look young. Some of them, the first-year men, look like children, as indeed they are, if measured by their years. Looking at them leaping to their feet when one of their passes were true to the mark, or one of their backs got loose through the Georgia Tech line, another scene thrust itself upon your memory. The history books tell you how on May 9, 1864, the Union forces marched out of Martinsburg up the Valley Pike. The action had begun. At Stanton, the Confederate commander, General Breckinridge, hearing of the movement, collected what he could. The Confederacy was in need of a blood transfusion, being bled white by the many battles, but there were no more troops. By May 14th, Breckinridge had collected 5,000 men, including the cadets from VMI. The cadets, with the 62nd Virginia, were the fighters of the line, 2 miles from the town of New Market. Looking at the cadets at the football game, one knew them to be blood brothers of the cadets who waited through the night of May 14th, the dawn and battle. Some of them were children, frail and tense, clutching muskets taller than they, and weighing almost a fifth as much. At daylight on May 15th, the two forces joined battle. The Union flanks were turned, and the full force of their central batteries were then turned on the center of the Confederate line held by the VMI cadets. They were under artillery fire for the first time, and it was fierce and destructive. The story goes that the older men on both sides, seeing the boys hold their ground, although they were falling in great numbers, sobbed aloud. They say, too, that when Breckinridge, seeing the desperate situation, had to call on them for a charge, that tears streamed down his face as he gave the order. But it had to be given. They got the order and they went forward, the 62nd with it. They were met with grape and canister. But they went on, despite heavy losses, and captured the battery, commanded by the famed artillerist, von Kleiser. It's a small story in the great panorama of the war, but it kept the dying Confederacy alive a little longer than would otherwise been true. Had the Union Army not been driven back, the wheat crop in the valley would not have been harvested. Hunger would have come sooner. The western end of the Virginia Railroad would have been lost. Lee, committed to battle in the deadly fighting at Spotsylvania, would have had to send part of his troops to New Market because the railroad was vital. It was a short, small engagement, but an important one. And while the VMI cadets were to render other service, they carved there in New Market, Virginia, a place in the affection of all men everywhere who appreciate discipline and courage. And watching the game, you knew that the men there in the field and the men in the stands would, if called on, answer as well as the Corps had answered on May 15, 1864. This is the story of BMI, and it's a heart-rending story. We've seen enough of that throughout Virginia and throughout our Western civilization. At Petersburg, Grant crossed the James in a sweeping move to turn Lee's right. He came to the defenses of Petersburg, and at Petersburg there were 115 young boys and a score of old men up on top of the hill. The boys no older than the ones here. And they held back, those 115 boys, held back the whole advance of Grant's army. And they suffered and paid the penalty for it. I've seen pictures of their bodies crumpled up in the bottoms of the trenches, but they saved Petersburg. We know the story of the little boy blues. In World War II, when the Soviets were coming into Germany like animals, and the things they did in Germany are absolutely indescribable. Adolf Hitler called out the SS division of the Hitler Jugend from 9 years old up to 15. And it was almost destroyed in the combats and the wars that followed. And we've done this thing time after time after time. And it's time that wars against our own kind stop. They must cease. It is blasphemy to raise your hand against one of your own kind. Blasphemy? Why? God said to Israel, I will place my law in your heart, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. Where is God? He's in our hearts. That makes us the temple of the Lord. And when we destroy God's temple, we are inflicting injury on God Himself. We are instructed to destroy those people who violate God's law. They are without God, without His consent and outside the law. He tells us whom to destroy and whom not to. But only those who violate the law. And the politicians have picked one cause after another in obedience to their bankers to make money out of the slaughter of our people. General Moore just told how since, including World War I, we've lost 500,000 young men and over 1.5 million wounded and injured in the wars. And out of this, we've gained absolutely nothing. And the international bankers have become rich. The international bankers will shortly call on us again to furnish our boys to go and kill our boys in South Africa once again. Now this is a bridge that's going to have to be faced sooner or later. It's a violation of God's law. It is blasphemy against God. And this is one of the things that we're going to have to face in the short time ahead. Now, I'm going to change quickly to the lighter side. You remember earlier I asked you what a head knocker was? And I didn't get any hands. Now, in this group, how many know what a head knocker is? Oh, okay. Now, it comes right out of the churches of the Eastern Seaboard of the United States. In the old days, it took a long time to get to church. And people sometimes had to go 5 to 10, 15 miles, even 20 miles to church. And once you came to church, you had Sunday service and you had afternoon service, and the service was long, 3, 4, 5 hours. And it would be hot. It would be hot in summertime. And the wind wouldn't be stirring. And you would be hot, and you had just eaten a great big lunch out under the trees. And you'd be sleepy, and you wouldn't be paying attention to the preacher. So, to remedy that situation, they elected an official of the church. And his title was head knocker. And his staff of office was a long pole. And on his pole was a round wooden ball. And what would happen is, as he would see people, they took that term over, and the person in command of an army unit today is a head knock. The